Well, I'm mildly ashamed to admit that I've always been one of those unbearable helicopter parents, running around with excessive worry about each and every scrape or sniffle their child has. In my defense, I was far from ready to have a son, much less to raise him on my own. Other than being a quiet kid, he's never caused me much trouble, apart from the occasional broken couple plate and a bit of sneaking around. Being a general scallywag, well, he was a wonderful child. Lately, he'd been having bad dreams, waking up crying in the middle of the night. I initially figured it was another unexpected gift from, growing up. Harboring such a creative and growing fantasy, it wasn't strange to think his dreams could be a bit too much. Being a dad ain't easy. I'd been downstairs preparing breakfast on an early Saturday morning. Alex, being a 5-year-old kid, it was hard to predict when he'd wake up and start running around the house in a futile attempt at burning some of that youthful energy. The smell of freshly burnt pancakes filled the kitchen, alongside a bit of smoke. As usual, I'd been a bit too preoccupied with multitasking and left the food on the stove for a tad too long, but Alex didn't mind. And as soon as he realized I'd be serving his favorite breakfast, he came running to the table. I handed him a plate of poorly constructed pancakes, and he immediately started consuming them, resembling something of a wild animal trying to eat its prey before other predators showed up. I looked at him in awe, while considering my own inadequacy in the kitchen. His mother had always been the master of multitasking, being able to serve perfectly prepared meals while making sure Alex didn't wreak too much havoc around the house. "It's going to start raining soon," Alex said, matter-of-factly, in between bites of mushy pancake. The statement, on its own, was innocent enough, though oddly specific. I chuckled as I looked out the window. A brilliantly blue sky stared back. It was a beautiful day. "I didn't know you could predict the future," I laughed. What a peculiar thing for him to say. While he ate, I prepared my own breakfast, which was a single pancake and a blazing hot cup of coffee. The most important thing for a healthy meal. I ate as I was reading the final chapter of what had been my wife's favorite book. It wasn't really my personal taste. However, it allowed me to stay connected to her. The distinct sound of water tapping against a window interrupted my daydreams, a noise which quickly increased in intensity. Within a minute, it was pouring down. What? I could have sworn the skies were clear minutes ago, I mumbled to myself, looking over to Alex. He was unmoved by the sudden change in weather. "Alex, you knew it would start raining." "Yeah, I told you," he responded, unfazed by his astonishing ability to predict the weather. "Did you watch TV before I woke up?" He shook his head. Television in the morning before completing his chores was a big no-no, so it was plausible he was lying about it. "The man in my dreams told me." Is that so?" I said, a bit confused. "Mm-hmm." The brief moment of his attention I got before he returned to munching up his food. Nothing more than a bizarre coincidence. As weird as it was, there wasn't any harm in it. Maybe my son would grow up to be the lamest superhero of all time, Weatherman. I amused myself with such a horrible dad moment. I guess it's truly in our blood to make awful jokes as we enter parenthood. Though, most people that knew me would attest that I'd always been lame like that anyway. As the day progressed, the clouds grew thicker in consistency and darker in color, looming heavily over our peaceful little town. There existed no sun strong enough to penetrate the blanket of darkness above. We spent the rest of the day sheltering ourselves from the rain in the warmth of our home, playing some board games and watching silly children's movies we'd seen 100 times before. I didn't mind losing on purpose and re-watching Dumbo, even if it would eventually drive me crazy. That night, I twisted and turned in my bed, being unable to fall into deep sleep. The weather was eerie and far too loud to comfortably listen to, and when I finally managed to drift off to dreamland, I was rudely awoken by lightning slamming down in our street, shortly followed by thunder so loud it shook the very foundation of our house. There was a more subtle disturbance hiding beneath the heavy sound of rain. Alex, sobbing in his room, probably frightened to death by the loud noises. Weather like that was an extremely rare occurrence in these parts of the country. I went to check on him, and figured, maybe, I could explain that lightning wasn't dangerous, and it was nothing to be afraid of. It's just nature going crazy. "Hey, buddy, you alright?" They couldn't get out," he managed to force out between sobs. Of course, it wasn't the lightning frightening him. It had been a bad dream. Nothing more, nothing less. And then there was so much water. Everyone was screaming. "Hey, don't worry. It was just a dream." I wrapped my arms around him, comforting him while he realized it was nothing more than his imagination. He stopped explaining the dream and simply sobbed into my shoulders. After calming down, I offered to read him a story, which he happily agreed to. Before long, he was completely under, snoring loudly, just like his old man. A dark morning arrived, and the streets were almost completely flooded. The rain persisted, stronger than ever, tapping incessantly on the roof and windows, only being interrupted by the occasional lightning strike. Anyone living downtown would probably be in serious trouble, so I switched on the news to keep myself updated. Every local story, naturally, evolved around the flooding. It was getting to the point where several people had been evacuated from the less developed areas with inadequate drainage systems. People had already died in the flood. A building had collapsed in on itself in the storm and trapped about 7 people in an isolated basement. Water rapidly started leaking in, and within minutes they were all submerged in ice-cold water. Terrified, and without anyone knowing they were there, they'd all drowned, just like in Alex's dream. When I heard him entering the living room, I quickly shut off the television. I couldn't simply confront him about this. Despite his uncanny ability to foresee future events, well, it wasn't a burden any 5-year-old should have to carry. "Hey, buddy, how'd you sleep?" I asked, nervously. "The rain was too loud," he said as he rubbed his eyes. I attempted to bring up his dream from the past night, but he simply repeated what I already heard and what I just witnessed on the news. Could it be a coincidence? Was a coincidence more or less likely than a child actually seeing the future? Several nights passed, and the rain kept pouring down. With each day, the city fell deeper into chaos and unrest. My son constantly suffered through his bad dreams, and with each night, they became more specific, to the point where I could recognize locations and time of day. I tried to call the police, hoping they could stop people from perishing in the storm, but they were too preoccupied and had no extra workforce to investigate what appeared to be, well, ridiculous predictions. Some dreams were more innocent than others. Alex predicted that shops would close down and people would struggle to find food. He told me that schools would close and that I wouldn't have to work for a while. My office building had apparently collapsed and we were all temporarily suspended. Well, and what tends to happen in times of peril, when the government fails to keep their citizens safe? People regress to their most basic, animalistic instincts. Looters took over the streets, and riots flared up around town. Our local law enforcement could only try to maintain order, a hopeless task. People with the means to leave quickly disappeared, finding better places to hold out until the storm would pass. But for the vast majority of us, there was no such option. We ourselves lived in a quiet area in the outskirts of town, so in all likelihood everything would turn out all right. As time passed, more stores started shutting down. Despite getting outside support, it was becoming increasingly difficult for people to enter or leave the city. The riots spread, and whoever remained brave enough to keep their shops open were frequently robbed, criminals seizing their opportunities while the police were too busy to respond to smaller crimes. Maybe I gave up too quickly, trying to prevent whatever horrors my son dreamed about. Each time I interfered, things seemed to go downhill for me. I told the police there would be a robbery at one of the local shops, and they told me they'd look into it. Out of morbid curiosity, I still went over to see what would happen, but as fate would have it, the police never showed. I decided to hang around the store for a while, letting my neighbor keep an eye on Alex back home. A couple of hours went by, uneventfully. Darkness lingered over, as it always did, but when nightfall came, it turned to a pitch-black void. In the weak lights emitting from the store, I saw the outline of two hooded figures entering. With only a gut feeling to tell me that they would be the culprits, I hid behind some shelves in the store. They were fairly direct, going straight to the cashier before pulling a gun and demanding they handed over the money. Had it only been a simple robbery, I wouldn't have acted on it, but I knew it would be more than that. They would murder the cashier after a short struggle. I had to do something. Upon deciding to act, my body froze up. Not out of panic, or due to a surge of adrenaline, but as soon as I decided to change the future I'd seen, I was physically locked. When I came back to, everything was over. I did my duty to see if I could save the innocent man that had just been shot in the head, but all I could really do was simply call for help and wait. Defeated, I returned home. It was already getting past Alex's bedtime, so I prepared some warm milk for him and read him a story. I'd decided I would carry his burden, never letting him know that the dreams were more than just simple nightmares. Yes, I would protect him. Last night, Alex came into my room, once again awoken by his bad dreams, but he wasn't sobbing anymore. I immediately awoke when I felt his presence. He'd never been a clingy child, and waking me up in the middle of the night was a first. I was jolted wide awake with a dose of worry. "Hey, buddy, what's wrong? Another bad dream?" He nodded his head. "Why don't you sit down over here and tell me about it?" I gestured to the bed. He told me about the dream, and I listened intently, knowing full well that changing the future was an impossible task. After his story, I put him back to bed. I struggled to compose myself as Alex filled me in on the horrors to come. In the morning, I called my brother. I asked if he could watch my son for a couple of days. The two of us had an understanding. In case of emergency, we'd be there for each other, no questions asked. We called it the Brotherly Pact. He came over immediately to pick up Alex, and that was that. I spent the remainder of the day making my final preparations, knowing full well that I could do nothing to prevent what was to come. My son had dreamt about my fate. He told me he had to say goodbye, and that his uncle would come to pick him up in the morning. The day would pass without anything happening, but at night men would break into the house thinking it was abandoned in the storm, perhaps hoping to find some valuables that had been left behind. I would be there, and, in an instinctive act, they would shoot me in the gut. Alone and in agony, I would succumb to my wounds. Just another bad dream. I wanted to protect myself, but any thought about leaving or grabbing some sort of weapon locked me in place. I couldn't alert anyone, and I couldn't flee. All I could do was act in a manner already decided by destiny. My mind knew the future, but my body did not. I'm not sure how I'm able to write this down. I assume since no one will read this until after I'm gone, it's somehow allowed. I'm just hoping that my brother will see this and guide my son to become the man I know he can be. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.